Well, a very good afternoon to you, or perhaps it's good morning or good evening to you, wherever you are listening to this presentation for International Coach Week. Welcome to you. My name is Natalie Ashdown from the Open Door Coaching Group, and I am welcoming to the line Professor Grace McCarthy from the University of Wollongong. Professor Grace is the Dean of Business in the Faculty of Business and Law at the University of Wollongong, and thank you so much for taking your time out today to share with us this wonderful research that you've been doing and your wealth of knowledge and experience. And today we're actually thinking about what drives the motivation of managers to coach their people. And we've got lots of information to share with you. You can feel free to pop a message into the chat box if you like. You can, by all means, ask questions, offer your comments. And it's wonderful to see so many people dialing in from all around the world. Before I begin, let me acknowledge the traditional owners, the custodians on the lands on which we meet today, and their continuing connection to the land, the waters, the communities of Australia, and the lands from all around the world upon which you might be joining us today. We pay our respects to them, to elders past, present and emerging, and elders from Indigenous communities from all around the world. So please feel free as we share today any thoughts or comments you have, and we look forward to connecting with you all. Thank you for taking the time out, everybody, to share International Coach Week with us as well. So I'm going to stop my share so that we can see each other better. That's the way. And as I said, welcome to you, Professor Grace. It's wonderful that you've taken this time out for us today. I do feel like I mentioned to you in our emails, I'm kind of meeting one of my heroes because I've read every paper you've written on the topic. They're all marked up. They're all highlighted. Some have actual coffee stains. I apologize for that, but it is wonderful to be learning from you and taking this time during International Coach Week to learn from you.
Thank you for such a lovely welcome, Natalie, and please just call me Grace. I was in industry for a long time, so while I am now and for the last 20 years been in the academic space, I feel very comfortable talking to other people who are passionate about coaching. We know the power of it, and so I'm really looking forward to this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, Grace, you have been researching leadership since 2001, and then you moved into focusing on the research around managers and coaches. So I thought maybe we could kick off our conversation with you. Perhaps you might describe over those years, what are the major changes you've actually seen in the industry, as you said, and in practice, and in workplaces over the time?
Sure. Well, I think 20 years ago, when we were looking at coaching, mostly what people thought about when they heard coaching was either executive coaching or life coaching. So with executive coaching in the workplace, it was somebody from outside coming in and they were, a sounding board. They would help people think about options, help them actually make their choices. But it was quite rare to hear people actually formally being described as either an internal coach or a coaching manager. And increasingly over that time since, we've seen the job advertisements for leaders of any kind very often say that they expect coaching skills. So it's interesting that we don't usually have a job that is where the job title is leader, but they're looking for leadership skills and they're looking for coaching skills. I did a workshop with one of the large banks here in Australia, and I asked the people in the room what was their definition of coaching, and every single one of them had a different definition. And it's kind of hard to have a coaching culture if everybody thinks it's something else. But it is certainly an expectation that we're seeing that people should know how to coach, even if the organizations don't quite know what they mean by it. And I think that's something that people are still grappling with in many cases. It sounds like a good thing. We should have it. And I think if we're really going to have a business case for coaching, we have to be very clear about what we mean by it. And it's different when we're talking about coaching managers than if you were making the business case for bringing executive coaches into the organization. So we're hearing and seeing the spread of coaching across the world. So it's not just the Anglo countries, it's also China and Korea, and it's Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, and it's Middle East, Africa, it's North and South America. And so we know that there's something genuine, interesting, some way of enacting leadership that managers are finding useful for really getting aligned outcomes for both the individual, for the manager, and for the organization. But I think we still have a lot of research to go to understand how that actually works in practice. Because one of the biggest changes in the last few years happened with COVID, which thankfully although it's still obviously around as a health issue, we're no longer in lockdown. We're no longer working remotely, except by choice. So we had this amazing real world experiment, and where previously a lot of us would have said, oh, when you have a difficult conversation, it's good to sit down with people side by side and be with them. And we had to learn to have those conversations online. So I think one of the changes we're seeing now is people beginning to make conscious choices. How many days should we be in the office? How do we create genuine collaboration online? How do we do coaching online in all different purposes for coaching conversations? And I think the other change that we've seen in that time, and COVID really exacerbated this as well, was that we're more open now about mental health and stress, and how we need to care for our employees, not just their physical well-being, their intellectual well-being, but their emotional well-being as well. And how do we as managers have a relationship with people that they feel safe to tell us that they're struggling, so that we can help before it becomes too big an issue. And so we don't just refer them to an employee assistance program, but we have ongoing conversations that establishes that trust. And I guess the last change I will highlight, because I think that whole idea of what's changed in the past 20 years, well, even the last 5 years, it's been huge. But the last change, of course, is artificial intelligence. And so the challenges that that brings with its potential for bias because of the way it's being trained, because of the algorithms involved, the data sets being used, but also the ability for it to help us as coaches and coaching managers. And I saw you did a lovely trial, Natalie, with looking at how you could use the ICF levels and get one of the AI apps to actually suggest how the questions could be improved. And I think that's a really amazing opportunity for us to be able to make intelligent human use of artificial intelligence.
Yes, it's wonderful that you've recapped those major events, I think, Grace. And the thing that stands out in what you've offered us is enacting leadership. So in each of those major events, and even with AI as it evolves, it's about how do we enact our leadership during those times, is what I'm hearing you say, and coaching enables that as part of the skill set.
I agree with that 100%. I think when we do a leadership course, traditionally you'd learn some leadership theory, and it might be transformational leadership. We've kind of left the great man theory behind, but they're still hearing a lot about transformational, and we hear servant leadership. But for me, coaching as a manager is actually a way of enacting leadership. It is a way of doing leadership. As managers, our work, we do it with words. We do it with what we say to people, how we say it, what we ask them to do, how we show them what to do. And so being a leader, nobody can really teach you that by giving you a book on leadership. It's something you have to do. And that's what people respond to.
Yeah, so in enacting our coaching skills and everything that is part of that, all of the ICF core competencies we're talking this morning about embodies the coaching mindset and yes, the self-awareness and the evoking awareness and all of that. So all of those things are what we're enacting when we're actually demonstrating our leadership, as you said, with the human connection as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It is about being ourselves and not having kind of artificial formulae of words, not mechanistically following a model. It is about having a way, knowing what's important in a coaching conversation, about listening to people, about the relationship, about how we can ask questions for different purposes. But really, when it comes down to it, it is about how we're going to get the best from the person that we're coaching in the interest of that person as well as the organization. And having that balance, coaching gives us a way to have balance. I think that's the magic, if you will.
Yes, and I think what I love about talking to yourself and the other conversations we've had today is that everything that we're talking about, when you started out, doing the research, it was a relatively new time for coaching. I come along many years later doing my research. I talk about us standing on the shoulders of giants. So what you were seeing back in your research those years ago is still here present, but I think many, many millions of people are more aware of what you were talking about back then.
And for me, the giant was Andrea Ellinger, and I was so sorry to meet her talk this morning, and I will definitely watch the recording if I can, because she was the person who really focused in this area more than anybody else. There were odd papers here and there, but she was consistently across her career fabulous.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And everyone can listen to the recording. I'm going to listen back to it as well. I just hoped I asked some quality questions because I was so entrenched in what I was listening to as I am now with you. And I wonder, Grace, would you mind turning to the work that you completed back in, I think it was 2020 with Dr. Julia Milner? Those papers that you wrote, they're cited by nearly everyone doing research in this area, including me. And what I noticed about this research was it was one of the first papers to give insight into the motivations of managers who are coaching. So there was research prior to that about beliefs and values, as you say, Andrea Ellinger's work, and lots of different research that came out over the time. But this was, and the benefits of managers coaching and the benefits they received and the benefits the coachees received. So lots of research around that. But this was about what motivated managers to coach. And I found that quite interesting. Would you mind sharing some of those insights with us today?
Sure. We didn't specifically ask them, what is your motivation to coach? What happened was we asked some very general coaching questions about what people were doing and what sort of things happened with it. And we had responses from, it was 580 managers in Australia. And in those responses, they gave us hundreds of free text responses. It took us quite a long time to go through them all.
Yeah, would have, yes.
And so what we did as we were trying to make sense of it and group those related themes together, what was coming out was that they experienced great joy in coaching. They were talking about the joy of seeing an employee develop. They were talking about witnessing transformations. They were talking about revelations and happiness and winning hearts and minds. And so, yes, they were getting all the positive outcomes, but the motivation was coming out really powerfully that this wasn't a transactional relationship. This was something that was really deeply personal and inspirational for the managers. They were talking about how much they learned from coaching, how much they enjoyed seeing their employees coming up with ideas that they hadn't thought about, that they were able to see then the employee engagement rise and the commitment, the passion, the enthusiasm. And if you think about it, when we do academic research, we often get very kind of bland tick box answers and it's all very neutral. We're having these amazing examples shared with us and amazing quotes that showed really how the managers didn't see this as just a job. They saw this as something that made a difference in the lives of their teams and their team members. So if I give just a couple of examples of the way people expressed this. So one of them said, to see a shy, unsure individual develop into an assured professional team leader and manager is a joy to see. And you could just, in that short kind of clip, you could just picture how that was happening, that they were able to see the transformation in the person and that they had contributed to making that happen. And another that said, I learned that when you find a diamond in disguise, it only takes time, patience, and encouragement to help them to find it in themselves. So their motivation was they were getting a personal satisfaction and reward from doing this, knowing also that it was meeting all their organizational objectives, that they were getting to increased alignment, they were getting increased employee engagement, the increased satisfaction, they were getting an interesting one, I think, as part of improved productivity, but they also talked about readiness for change. And they talked about the fact that when you have that trusting relationship between the manager and the employees, when change is happening, employees are more ready to accept that that change is possibly going to be okay. Because one of the reasons that people fear change is usually because they fear it's going to have a negative impact on them. So, because otherwise, so for example, if I say to people, would you like to work 3 days a week and get paid for 5? That's a change. But most people will say, yeah, I'm okay with that change. So when people fear change, it's more because they think it's going to be bad for them. And so having a positive, trusting relationship with your manager that has been developed through coaching, that actually helps people to be ready for change. And this is really interesting because change isn't just a once-off project that you manage and that's done and there's never going to be any more change. Change is ongoing, continuous now, not episodic. So I've been doing a follow-up study, just looking at that readiness for change. Instead of managing resistance to change, if we're proactive and we have a coaching relationship, a trusting relationship with our employees, then change will be easier to work through. So the motivation, absolutely about hearts, minds. It's not just an intellectual endeavor, it's actually quite strong emotions coming out here as well.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And the trusting relationship, I'll circle back to that as well. What I was wondering though, given that you've been researching this area for a long time, when you found those results coming out that managers were actually experiencing the joy of coaching and experiencing those personal benefits for themselves, how did you feel as a researcher and as a practitioner when you were seeing that?
I was so excited and so excited to see so many people sharing this. These were practicing managers doing their daily job. This is how they were doing it. And this was lifting them up and lifting up their teams. It was extraordinary. I would say that in those 580, the majority were actually in services. It was a smaller number of managers in manufacturing industries that responded. And so I think that's an interesting area to explore. Are some sectors more people oriented? Do they have to be, because they have to make sure that their employees who are going to be dealing directly with customers are really cared for? But so I'm not really sure. Are some sectors just haven't developed their coaching skills as much as others? So there's lots of things, interesting things still to explore.
Other threads that will come out of the research for sure, absolutely. And when you talk about the trusting relationship, it does seem to me definitely from what you've described that there's benefits from the manager to build those trusting relationships, but then the coachee and the employees also experience those benefits. As you say, that there's engagement, there's productivity, there's readiness for change, all built off that trusting relationship. Do you see it that way as well? It's definitely a two-way relationship, that there's benefits coming both ways.
Absolutely. So what we were being told was the employees feel very empowered. They get to identify solutions themselves. They're achieving their goals. They've got more ownership. They're committed to the actions that they've identified because they've been involved in coming up with those solutions. One of the interesting comments from one of the respondents was that I'll quote, it overcomes the fear of failure consequences, quote, that our education system so often instills and which stifles courageous exploration. So with a coaching relationship, employees actually feel safe in trying something new. They feel supported. They feel supported in coming up with ideas and in implementing ideas. So you get more innovation, more of that buzz, and it all contributes to that engagement piece. So you get so many different benefits. And of course, you improve your staff retention, because we know from other research that one of the biggest influences on managers, on employees leaving an organization, is their immediate manager. So if you have a coaching relationship in place, that actually makes more people want to stay. Until they've grown and you want to send them off with your blessing and you leave the nest, it's time to go, you can do more things, and they go with our support. But I think it's interesting that people are more willing to stay with a coaching manager. And I think the alignment piece is so interesting for employees as well. They actually know where they fit in. They know how they're adding value. They know how they're contributing to the overall goals as well as the team and the individual goals. When you think of that alignment, that buzz, you've got managers all over the company all doing this, employees all over the place, feeling aligned, feeling they're making a difference, and they're coming up with ideas and they're able to do stuff. Why wouldn't everybody do it?
Indeed. Indeed, it's definitely a question we ask. But I also am really appreciating what you say here, Grace, because it might be something that we take for granted that other people are not aware of. But alignment is what organizations are desperately wanting, I think, post-COVID, from what I've read and all the research that I've read as well. They're trying to find out, what does the culture mean? What does alignment mean now? So your research really amplifies, I think, the ability of coaching to create that alignment. And would you say so from that perspective?
Absolutely. And I think this is where the HR department can actually see how what they're doing can contribute to organizational success. A few years ago, when people were talking about flattening organizations, and they got rid of a layer of middle managers because they didn't know what they did. And in fact, middle managers are often the people that translate strategy into something that teams and individuals can work with. And coaches do that even more powerfully as a coaching manager, because they actually get people to understand how they can individually and as a team contribute. And that alignment, if you can replicate it across the organization, is so powerful. And whether that's people are in the workplace, the physical workplace, whether they're online or hybrid. And that's what we're grappling with. How do we actually make that piece work so everybody feels equally valued and have equal opportunities to contribute and to be seen, and that there isn't any proximity bias where managers see the person that's sitting outside their office most often and forgets about some of the people who are out of sight, out of mind. There's a risk that we have to guard against in a hybrid workplace or in a remote workplace, that we don't see all of our team members and give them all those equal opportunities. And there's a risk in not being able to actually bring them along with us on the journey as easily. And I think there's a lot of scope for us to actually improve our coaching skills for the remote and hybrid workplace.
Yes, absolutely. Call to action there as well. And as we've talked about, coming back to how do we build trust? So how do we build trust in this so-called new normal, the hybrid workplace, et cetera? How do we build trust continuously and not just take it for granted that it's there as well? I think is the other thing that we need to think about.
Yeah.
I wonder also, Andrea, if you might, beg your pardon, Grace, you might comment on the opportunity to coach in the workplace. And some of your research was actually suggesting that managers might not always have the opportunity to coach. And given everything that you've seen over the years, what do you think are still the main impediments to coaching within an organization?
Well, there are a couple of things. It takes time. Now, if we think about time, that's not just a once-off thing. It takes time to develop the relationship. And so you have to put in those initial hard yards to actually spend time getting to know the people in a culturally appropriate way. And that will differ with people from different cultural backgrounds. How much chit chat, how much you might talk about the football, or how much you might talk about something you've seen on Netflix, or whether you're straight into the task and those personal conversations are more. You have to spend time understanding and working with the people working with you to actually have that relationship that allows you then to continue coaching. So that's certainly part of it. But ultimately, if you get that right, it then starts saving you time, because they start coming to you with solutions rather than with problems. And we've probably all had that experience where somebody comes in and they say, oh, I need your help with this. And you say, tell me about it. And they tell you about it. And by the time they finish telling you about it, they've actually worked it out for themselves, and off they go. And say, okay, that's fine. I know what to do now. And they say, thank you. And you haven't done anything, but you've listened and you've helped them to actually get clear in their own minds what they were thinking about. So longer term, it actually does save you some time. But there are context factors as well. So if you're in a crisis situation, now's not the time to start thinking about what are all the possible options we might have.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
If you're in the emergency room and you're the manager there, and something doesn't work brilliantly, you're going to kind of do the life-saving part first. And then at a different time, might be a different day, when you're getting together and thinking about what could we do differently, and then start exploring options. So time in that sense of, well, when is the right time? So there's also, I think, the question around, do you always have to have a coaching approach? And no, there are some times when you actually have to tell people, and sometimes you have to do some training. Sometimes you move between the modes according to what's useful. I am very much against somebody who's absolutely purist and dogmatic. It always has to be non-directive coaching, because now sometimes you do what's in the best interest of the individual and the organization, and you weave through and work through the different options there. But if you go through things where you mechanically think, now I've got to do the GROW model or whatever else it might be, they're wonderful models, they all have their uses. But each conversation is a once-off. Each conversation is a time to actually listen to the other person, to be there for them, to be fully present. In a different bit of research with somebody who was my student before and has since completed her PhD in Queensland, but a bit of research we did when she was a master's student was around coachable moments, identifying those moments where, so it's not a formal coaching session, it's that corridor coaching where you're using your coaching skills with the person because it helps the person at the time to get things right, to improve things. And she was looking at, why do managers sometimes not do that? And what some of the managers that she interviewed said, it was because they were a bit afraid of where the conversation might go, or that they might damage their relationship with this person that they had to carry on working with. There's a bit of a fear of emotions that comes through sometimes. As managers, sometimes we like things nice and neutral and just factual, because if somebody gets upset, that can be hard to deal with. But actually, hard to deal with things are things managers have to do. So there can be all sorts of reasons why people feel, I guess, a little bit scared. I mean, some people would prefer to do a set session as coaching because I feel I know I'm going to go through those steps and that's fine. And other people think, well, I don't want to do that. I don't feel qualified enough, well trained enough to do that, but I can have these informal conversations. So it doesn't have to be the same answer for everyone. It can be that in the particular context, I mean, there's some organizations where it will never be called coaching, and that's absolutely fine too. I'm totally comfortable with that. If people are using coaching skills like listening and asking powerful questions, reflecting, observing, giving feedback with goal setting, all of that, it's coaching. And the words we use, I'm not fussed about. I use coaching for that scenario, but if other people don't, doesn't matter. I'd rather they do it rather than just talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you are reflecting on those coaching moments as well. I think that's also related through to the ICF core competency around coaching mindset, which we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks on the Coaching Cafe. And what's occurring to me actually, Grace, as you speak, is that we may not always have the opportunity to coach as you've described. However, we can still have a coaching mindset. We can still take a coaching approach to our leadership or to the way we show up or to what we do. So as you say, the listening, the curiosity, the exploring, the asking a good question. So maybe we don't do the extended GROW model, as we know, but we can still bring a coaching mindset to the way that we role model and bring ourselves to our leadership.
Yeah. And I would say to anyone who's feeling, I guess, uncertain about coaching, which is probably not anybody in this call, but if they were, I would actually just start with listening. To me, that is the most amazing, powerful skill. It's transformational, genuinely listening to the other person, not when you're doing your email at the same time and just going, yeah. Not when you're multitasking, but truly listening. I think that is so powerful that you can go a long way with that alone.
Indeed, absolutely. And you referenced mental health conversations at the beginning of our conversation as well. And that is part of that as well, just being there, creating that space to just listen rather than have to jump in and solve the problem as well. So
Another mantra that I came across somewhere was when you mentioned mindset, skill set, tool set. I think that is such fun because we've got a coaching mindset, and then we develop our skills in particular things like asking insightful questions. And then there's particular tools that each of us might actually find useful because that's the context we work in. So I think mindset, skill set, tool set, I have no idea who first came up with it, but I actually find it really useful.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be jotting that one down for sure to remember that when we go out to do our work as well. I wonder, you have touched on the organisation and the role that coaching plays within our organisations. Obviously, it's part of your core research. And I'm interested in the systemic, the systems, the environment, the context in which coaching finds itself, I suppose, or how we're trying to enact coaching, as you said. And Grace, I know that your research highlights the crucial roles of HR managers, and there'll be many on the line listening, and L&D managers, and so we have those coaching roles, but we're also HR managers or L&D managers or whatever it might be. That crucial role that they can play in educating managers around the value of coaching. And the wider role that organizations have to support coaching. So
yes.
We can come onto a wonderful coaching program, but then we've got to go, I talk about Air Force, come on the coaching program, but then they've got to go back into the operations, the battle rhythm, etc. So could you expand out a bit more about that for us?
Sure. And I think what you said is really interesting. There was a paper that was done a long time ago, and it was in the public service in England. And they found that if you combined coaching with a workshop, then the transfer of what was learned in the workshop to the workplace went up to something like 88% from about 20-odd%. It's a huge uplift. And so sometimes organizations waste the investment that they make in training because people go back to the workplace and nothing else has changed. And if nobody's following up, that they don't then actually continue with whatever new skills that they have actually developed. And the wonderful late Tony Grant wrote a paper called It Takes Time, The Stages of Change, where he said it takes about 6 months for managers to really incorporate those coaching skills in their daily practice. And they need support on the way through to do that. So if you just send somebody on a training course and don't support them afterwards, your money's down the drain, pretty most of it. So one of the things that we advocate for in that paper that you mentioned at the start, and also in another paper specifically about training for leaders as coaches, is doing specific coaching training for managers. So managers have specific challenges when they're coaching. Some of those to do with confidentiality, they're to do with the role, the dual role that they're playing. It can be to do with employees telling them things that they mightn't normally tell a manager. They might tell them they might actually have a conversation with them, a more open conversation about their goals, perhaps, in which they talk about leaving the organization. And that mightn't be something they would have told the manager yet at that stage. So how do managers actually navigate this dual role, and the fact that the power of being a coaching manager will lead to people trusting them with information that they mightn't otherwise. And the ability to do things like taking advantage of those coachable moments of actually knowing when it's useful to actually have a conversation and when it's useful to divide a conversation into two, for example, because you've got an ongoing observation to observe your employees, which an external coach wouldn't have. So a lot of the external training was designed around the external coach. Whereas for the coaching manager, if you're having a difficult conversation, it's very easy to pause after the first bit and reconvene when the person's had a chance to absorb that feedback, which is in some ways perhaps upset their self-image and their self-esteem, and they need time to kind of just let that sit a little bit before they can move into the more positive space of thinking about how they might address that actual issue or a perceived issue. So we have different choices that we can make as a coaching manager. And I think that's really important, that the coaching be specific, and HR managers can take that on board. HR managers can also really encourage senior managers to role model, to give those positive examples of coaching. If you have credible managers in your organization, and they share the benefits of coaching that they've personally experienced in that context of that organization. It's far more powerful than anybody external saying, oh, coaching is a good thing. So what we're talking about really is letting managers choose for themselves who they want to coach, because we've given them information and given them examples and reasons to coach, but they have the autonomy of whether or not to coach. Because if you tell people that they have to coach and they don't want to, it's not really going to have a very positive outcome. So we're much better off, actually, if we're trying to do something systemically, is actually having everybody have an understanding of coaching, whether they're employees, managers, whatever their position in the company is. So there's a shared understanding in the organization of what coaching is, what can be expected, so that when managers adopt that approach, employees aren't kind of totally taken by surprise. And in framing that, we link coaching with the organization's values, and with that expectation that managers are going to foster people's development. That should be an expectation of every leader, every manager. Your role isn't just to get a task done, it should always be about growing your people. So at the start, there's all that sort of setting up work that HR managers can help do to get a program off to a good start, to get a change in culture. And the people who wrote most about organizational culture were the two Davids, Megginson and Clutterbuck. I mean, this is part of their space. And they're well worth reading as how to develop a coaching culture. On an ongoing basis, managers can do a lot to support each other, but it's great if the HR people can actually support by, I guess, creating an environment for peer support. So managers who are coaching can actually connect with each other, giving updates. It might be just little tidbits that come out frequently that say, another thing you could try is this. It might be examples of how to tackle specific challenges. It might be having somebody there that people can talk to if an issue arises that the coaching manager isn't sure how to tackle. In external coaching, when we talk about getting supervision, and one of my students did their PhD about executive coaching supervision, and asking, well, the question, is the model of supervision we use in psychology, is that really appropriate in the executive coaching space? And whether it is or isn't, I would say it's not appropriate in the coaching manager space. And even the word supervisor is alienating. But to have somebody there who can be a safe place for the coaching managers to talk to, if HR can be in that space where they can be the sounding board, a coach for the coaches or a mentor for the coaches, that is enormously helpful to keep things going. Somebody's interested, but it also gives that support when it's needed. I think that's really important, so that people don't feel that they're floundering, especially in the early stages, but even on an ongoing one. And then to continue to give managers reasons to coach, sharing some of those good outcomes, sharing the benefits, senior managers still continuing to speak positively about those examples, providing some recognition for the managers that are adopting a coaching approach, if that's what the organization wants to do. And then I think it's on an ongoing basis. You've got the initial phase, but ongoing as new employees and new managers join the organization, that coaching is just part of what's shared as part of the induction. It's linked with all of these systems, the processes, career development, so that managers have that ongoing. They've got the ability from the training program, which is customized for them. They have the motivation with all these wonderful examples of successful outcomes that have been achieved in their context. And they know how to take advantage of the opportunities, and they know why, and from all sorts of different levels, both for the people they're coaching, also for their own career, and also for the organization.
I'm just nodding and smiling. It's music to my ears, everything that you're sharing, and I'm sure it's music to everybody's ears that are listening to you, Grace. And I think what I'm enjoying most about talking with you as well is that this has been developed over many, many years of research as well. So it's not just something that we're passionate about. There's been a very strong call for the research, the evidence, and that's where the research that you've done actually builds on provides that evidence that people are seeking as well. I think what is really resonating with me as well is the discussion you had, or you just offered us around role modeling, and that as you mentioned, maybe there is actually no time for coaching, or the work that I'm doing doesn't call for a coaching approach because I'm doing something that's different, teaching people how to use a piece of machinery or something like that. But even in that, there is still that, as we talked about, the coaching moments, the coaching mindset, but also the role modeling is still there. So not only us as coaches who know, but other people within the organization, their role in role modeling.
Yeah, and it just becomes, it's the default way. As I said, there'll be times when it's not the right approach, but if it's default, I think that is hugely powerful. And looking at those individual micro skills, there are so many ways we can improve them. So I mentioned that managers have that opportunity to observe their employees, and then they've got the opportunity to give them feedback, but they ask their perspective and listen to them and understand it from that as well. That opportunity to give really relevant feedback on an ongoing basis, think about how much that can actually raise performance across the board. Again, being careful with our observations, that we don't jump to conclusions, that we don't think that we know what's happening without actually checking in with the person. But if we get a shared view of that reality, and then we can come to a shared view of how we might actually do something even better, then it's not about addressing deficits, more about saying there are opportunities every day, opportunities for ideas. It might be new products for some people, it might be new services, it might be new processes, it might be tweaks on things we're doing. But if every day we go in and we're doing something that's slightly better than we did the day before, wow, we just carry on in an upward trajectory.
Absolutely. And we're making a difference in the work we do. Absolutely. Well, I can't believe that our time has gone so quickly. I would I have asked if anyone else wants to throw in a question or a comment, but what I am really interested in is any other tips, because when we get to the opportunity to speak to people like yourself, Grace, I don't want to say I'm not asking for throwaway tips, but I really want to take the opportunity to gather those additional words of wisdom you might have, or anything you think is particularly important to share with the alumni and people who might be listening.
Yeah. Well, one which was actually triggered by one of the comments there in the chat is that coaching isn't always about saying to people that, oh, you're doing a great job, you're fantastic, and now let's make it even better. Sometimes the feedback you're giving them is specific and it is constructive, but it is about doing things differently. Now, a lot of the people I've come across have been trained in giving the feedback sandwich.
Yes.
You say something nice, and then you give them the bit of feedback in the middle, and then you give them the other bit. Now, it is really, a lot of people have told me that now when somebody says something nice to them, they duck because they know there's something worse coming. Indeed. And other people have said they just discount the nice bits because they know there's a bit in the middle. And other people discount the bit in the middle because they just hear the nice bits at the start and the nice bit at the end, and off they go and they wander. And so I think being a coaching manager is about having sometimes very difficult and challenging conversations, and it's much more difficult with some people than with others. It is about confronting generalizations. For example, when people say, oh, nobody else is doing it, or everybody else says, and saying, well, let's have a look at that. And so we have to actually have some very difficult conversations. So it's how we do it. In terms of giving that feedback, that balance, I would separate them. And the specific bit of feedback that is about something that needs to be done differently, that's one bit. And other times then you're actually nurturing that and giving them the positive feedback about what they're doing really well. But if you put them together, there's a risk that either of them will just get lost. Now,
I agree. I also just wanted to add there too, that distinction that you drew between executive coaches and the coaching manager who has to have this potentially difficult conversation and see the person again and again, like in another hour. So there's other things to think about, and that relates to the comment here around finding the balance there.
Yeah. And then there's a question there. Is a structured plan with achievable milestones valuable for planning how we can implement coaching in our teams? Plans are always useful, but keep them flexible. We live in a very chaotic world, and we have to be willing to adapt. If you're looking at, I would say, don't jump straight to SMART goals would be one of my tips if you're looking for a tip, Natalie, because you might find you're tying down all the details of a goal that wasn't really very meaningful to start with. People are just doing the goal to keep either HR happy or to keep the coach happy, and they don't actually then achieve the goal because it wasn't really important to them in the first place. So I think finding something that's really important and then working out the plan for how to achieve it, but focus on finding the important thing first.
I'd agree with you. I mean, I'm mad for a plan, and I mean milestones and the planning. Absolutely. I think the other comment I'd add to that is that we would implement that in partnership with our teams. So any plan, the plan is the outcome of the coaching. The plan is the outcome of the conversations we've had that we're implementing together and partnering together. So. Absolutely, and if SMART goals fall out of that, that's great. But it's the conversations that we're having with our teams.
And we know from other research into strategy, for example, that if we involve people in developing the strategy, just like developing the plan, then the plan is more likely to be implemented. So actually the total amount of elapsed time may actually be shorter, because although you've spent a lot of time up front in that consultation developing things collaboratively, but implementation is quicker and stronger. And I think that is a really interesting thing when we think about, oh, we don't have time to consult and be collaborative. We have to just get on and do it.
Yes, and there's something very, I was just going to add, because someone's mentioned in the chat here a great piece of advice about not jumping in straight into SMART goals. And I'm just thinking about the conversations we've had throughout our day today. And it has been around the power of coaching evoking awareness. So the ICF core competency around evoking awareness, being curious, exploring, not just taking what's on the surface. And it occurred to me that we could quite quickly set a SMART goal and off we go. However, we could take the time in that trusting relationship that you've described, Grace, to dig a bit deeper together as a team, to explore, to be curious, to evoke awareness amongst ourselves, and then turn it into the goals or the plan or whatever that might be.
And I think one of the spaces that we're probably going to see a lot more development in is in the team coaching space. So we're developing our skills primarily as managers with our individuals. And then we have our team meetings, and we kind of leave our coaching skills behind and the team meeting, whatever it was supposed to do. And I think we can really develop in that space as well. So we get more of that team shared understanding, balancing the team and the individuals. So you still carry on with your individual coaching, but also have some team coaching sessions and reflective sessions. So you decide to actually learn something together or do something together, and that develops those relationships. So both each individual each individual team member to the coaching manager, but also to each other and then the team as a whole. And that really, I think, amplifies the reach of coaching across the organization.
Oh, indeed. And amplifies the values, but also amplifies, as you've described earlier in our conversation, the trust, the partnering, and with that, then all the other benefits that flow on, indeed. Yes.
So I see there's a question in the chat where Wendell has asked about the conflict. Could I elaborate on the conflict between being the manager and then having a coaching conversation about someone who wants to leave the organization or change careers, whatever that might be? So when you're having that conversation with somebody and about where they see themselves in the future, and you really want to get to what's important to them, and they start telling you about how, well, I don't see myself here in a few months' time. Now, they mightn't have told the manager that at this stage until they were actually ready to go. So there are a number of ways you can pursue that conversation. It can be around understanding, are there other opportunities for them to stay within your organization that they haven't perhaps explored yet? So helping them to see all the opportunities that are there. It may be the right thing for them to do, but let's see what the other options are. But also that being very clear about your coaching conversation, being confidence, unless it's something about something illegal or there's personal safety involved, something that has to be notified. But you can actually advise the person, if they're telling you something that in confidence, that you think it would be beneficial to the organization to know, you can ask them if they would notify whoever you think they should notify. So it's being absolutely maintaining the confidentiality and the trust, but also letting them see why you think it might be a good thing for them to actually also tell X, Y, Z, or to tell it to you in your capacity as manager, that you can then start thinking about succession planning if you need to do that, for example. So it is really important to keep people's trust. And if they tell you something and then the next thing is it's all over the office, that's it's very hard to get trust back once you've lost it. So given the power of coaching, and that people do tell you things they mightn't tell otherwise, you have to use that power really wisely. Or it's the Star Wars quote, with great power comes great responsibility.
Indeed, absolutely, absolutely. Were there other things you wanted to share with us while we had the opportunity?
I would say to people, experiment with AI if you haven't already, because I think we always want to improve our own skills, and AI is like a bit of a pocket coach if we use it wisely and keep our human judgment. My advice for anybody using it is to use multiple apps, because they were created by different organizations, so they have different data sets that they've been trained on, and they may have different biases. They won't all cancel each other out because they were quite often programmed by the same people with the same sort of background, but you will see some differences between them. So the common ones that people talk about, apart from ChatGPT, there's Gemini, there's Copilot, there's Claude, there's Perplexity. There are hundreds of them now. But it is worth, as we all try and learn a little bit more as we continue to do our jobs as managers, working out where they can be helpful. I think they're really helpful for reflection, as you used in your example previously. I think they're also very good for doing some of the mechanical electronic nag job. So when we talked about people not, implementing what they've learned in a training session, then a coach bot or a coaching app can actually follow up with them, say, well, you know that you learned about X in the workshop. Have you tried doing that yet? And people actually respond to the electronic nag almost as they would to a human. So we can maybe keep some of the nag stuff and the mechanical things for the coach bot, and we have some of the more interesting conversations. But we're in such early stages of this, it's really exciting to see how we might use it to enhance our human work with other human beings rather than to have ourselves replaced.
Yes, indeed. And we are hoping, actually, as part of an extended International Coach Week, to have Nikki Tellenbosch from the university in South Africa there. Yeah. He did an amazing presentation for the ICF. He developed one of the first coaching bot apps that you're talking about, and applied that app to goal attainment and looking at the research there. So it is evolving, and it is exciting to be thinking, as you said, Grace, how can it enable us to be better coaches is the question that I think is quite fascinating, without losing what makes us coaches in the first place.
Yeah, and I think my last tip that I would give is, if people haven't already come across the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring, it's a free journal from Oxford Brookes. Declared my interest. I'm on the editorial board, but it is invaluable. It comes out a couple of times a year with a special issue, and it's on a wide range of contexts. So it's not all managers coaching, it's not all executive coaching, but there's always something to learn from it. And it's free and it's online. So if you Google IJEBCM, International Journal, Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring, you'll find it.
Yes, I really encourage that as well. And one of the reasons for that is because, as we've discussed, it is full of the very early days of, it sprung out of the early days of the need for empirical research and evidence for coaching. And a lot of the giants, the Ellinger, the Grant, yourself, a lot of those papers, those research papers are available. And it's very interesting from my perspective to think about how we have evolved coaching over the years, but also how it's very much the same as what was discovered in those early calls for evidence on coaching and the need for empirical research. So, yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And of course, we want to grow and develop ourselves as coaches. So that's an excellent source to direct people to. Thank you.
Right.
Well, I can't believe it. We have come to the end of our time together. Thank you so much, Grace, for your time. And I want to acknowledge you and the research you've done in a couple of ways. First of all, I want to acknowledge the research you've done, which we are all growing from and developing from. But I want to acknowledge you as a role model, as a person, as we said in the beginning, passionate about coaching and how coaching can make a difference. And you role model for us what that really looks like. So, and I really want to honor your time today in sharing your wisdom and your wealth of knowledge and experience with us all today, because from your willingness to share is how we all learn and grow and develop. So thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Natalie. And it's been lovely to have everybody join us online. Always happy to come back. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.